Welcome back. You're watching All Angles, and the latest crime statistics show a rising murder rate in the country. It increased by almost 9% in the last 3 months of last year. 6,859 people were killed in the period, and 902 of them were women. Let's discuss this with criminologist Nirmala Gopal from the University of KwaZulu-Natal. Thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. And I suppose it's a very worrying picture that in one quarter we could see such a rapid increase in violent crime in the country. I mean, your thoughts on the statistics that were announced yesterday, and really just the role that our law enforcement agencies are playing or not playing when it comes to protecting citizens.
Good afternoon, and thank you to eNCA for this gracious invitation, and good afternoon to the viewers. So I think, yes, you rightfully point out that especially the murder rates are of crucial concern, not just to the criminal justice system, but to the populace of South Africa as well. I think I want to start, before I answer your question directly, I want to start by asking, what is the purpose of these crime statistics? And then what is the purpose of the crime statistics, particularly or specifically to the high rates of murder that we just recorded? And for me, the purpose of the statistics then is to help us to design appropriate prevention programs. But let's zoom in onto the rates of murder. I think that, crime statistics has its own weaknesses, but looking at the statistics on murder or homicide in particularly is the most reliable data that we usually collect in terms of us understanding what crime in the country could look like. Yes, of course, I think murder and murder against women is of huge concern. But I think let's expand that conversation. And when we expand the conversation, the questions we should be asking behind those frequency counts, because what the stats are is really frequency counts. It tells us how many people have reported a particular crime at a particular location, etc., geographical location, etc. But what are the stories? What are the narratives behind those statistics? And if we look at murder, and if we say that there are many women who are being murdered, the questions we should ask is, why are women the victims of murder? Or why do we have a disproportionate number of women or races, etc., who are victims and perpetrators of these crimes?
And that's a very important question that you asked there, Professor Nirmala, because you've just mentioned that it's women, and I'm just wondering, where does the fault lie? Is it the fact that our law enforcement agencies are not equipped to have the kind of oversight that we need? Is it a lack of resources? The President did speak about capacitating SAPs in the State of the Nation address, but what is the fault here, and how do we get that right?
Yeah, very important question. And I think it's not just the criminal justice system, it's not just SAPS, it's the entire society that needs to converge. Crime is not just about a person. Crime is about the social conditions, it's about the economic conditions, it's about the political conditions that actually influence crimes particularly. So I think that's where the conversations need to shift into spaces that actually inform and influence crime. Let's take a step back and look at the issue of patriarchy, for example. Why do women become victims of crime? And why are men usually the perpetrators of these crimes? When you look at rape, you look at sexual assault, you look at homicide. Is it not because men and women themselves believe that they are inferior to men? They are inanimate objects in a society. And in that way, they disempower themselves and allow or could facilitate their own victimhood. So I think these are the very crucial, broader conversations that we need to have as a society.
No, that's absolutely correct. And then let's talk more about, I'm really just keen on us unpacking the role that law enforcement can play here in addressing some of these issues. And just based on your assessment, as someone who focuses on the sphere quite closely, do you think enough has been done, just in general, overlooking the rates of crime in the country and how they're being dealt with?
So anecdotally, I think we know the response. As a society, we are unhappy with law enforcement agencies. And we make no secret of that. So the question then to ask is, how are law enforcement personnel trained? How are they trained to deal with specific types of crimes? If we look at rapes or sexual assault, are they providing the kind of service, the kind of support that our communities require? Are they ensuring that we have high conviction rates? So reporting it is one aspect of it. What happens beyond the reporting? Do we have proper recording? Do we take statements accurately? Or do these statements get to the court and get thrown out because the information is inadequate? There are easy ways through which the perpetrators can actually beat the law. I think those are critical questions to ask at the level of your police stations.
No, absolutely. And of course, while we deal with these questions that you've just raised in terms of law enforcement agencies dealing with this sufficiently, I wonder if that gives rise to increased vigilantism and more community members taking matters into their own hands. And while that's not necessarily the best way to deal with this, that frustration is increasingly coming through where community members will just take matters into their own hands as transgressions are done in their communities.
Absolutely. There's very little, if any, confidence in the law enforcement agencies. And I think our society has reached a level where they are now saying to themselves, if we can't rely on our state institutions to protect us, let us start protecting ourselves. And whether it's transgressing the law in terms of seeking that protection, whatever it is, the frustration levels are really high against the poor service delivery of our SAPs.
No,
and sadly, that is the reality.
No, absolutely. And then just to wrap it off, Professor, your view just in terms of what's currently happening and the crimes that have increased. We've spoken about murder and mostly against women. Do you think there's anything more that can be done by government to establish platforms to protect women in South Africa? We've been talking about issues of gender-based violence for years now in the country, and for years we've seen horror stories that have come about. There are court cases currently being taken place because of gender-based violence. But do you think enough is being done to protect our women and children by government and related stakeholders?
So I think that the narratives that emerge from the societies, from communities, tell us that not enough is being done. And our communities are really should be the beneficiaries of protection programs, intervention programs, etc. So I think that is clear evidence that not enough is being done. In addition to the fact that when we interrogate what's happening at the criminal justice service or system, we are further able to see that very little, if any, is being done. And I think what needs to happen and must happen is that we need louder voices. We need political will, because our populace oftentimes use our political leaders as role models. So if we can show, if our politicians, if our ministries, if our head of policing can show that it's not just about it's not just about housebreaking or hijacking or drugs that we're concerned about, but we are really focused on women being safe in our societies. And I think that should go a long way, in addition to the fact that even as communities, social movements, we need to have louder, more profound, more energetic social movements, not just of women, but men and women who say, we will not tolerate violence against women, violence against children, and other vulnerable communities, and enough is enough. And I think a combination of these voices is so critical to us making some difference, because it's 20 years, it's 30 years, it's 40 years, and women are still unsafe in our communities.
Yeah, absolutely. Professor of Criminology at the University of KwaZulu-Natal, Nirmala Gopal, thank you very much for your time this afternoon, breaking down those crime statistics, shocking crime statistics in a single quarter that were released yesterday.